The sky was a canvas of soft blues and golden rays as Emily leaned her head against the car window. The winding mountain road coiled around cliffs and pine forests like a ribbon, and for a moment it felt like everything was finally falling into place. Derek had surprised her with a weekend camping trip, just the two of them and their corgi, Rusty, before the baby arrived. Emily, now in her 9th month, was swollen and often exhausted. But something about the fresh air and Derek's sudden sweetness gave her hope. She looked over at him, his eyes focused on the road, his jaw relaxed, the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. He had packed everything himself: the tent, sleeping bags, even the prenatal snacks she liked. Rusty was curled up in the back seat, ears twitching, tail thumping every time Emily spoke. To anyone looking in, they were a happy, expectant couple embracing one last adventure before parenthood. But Emily couldn't shake the unease that had crept into her bones over the past few weeks. Derek had been distant, preoccupied, at times cold. Yet here he was, laughing, rubbing her belly, calling her his brave mama bear. It didn't make sense, but she wanted to believe. By the time they arrived at the Overlook campsite, the sun was low. Derek sprang into action, setting up the tent and building a fire while Emily rested on a blanket. Rusty didn't leave her, sighed, even when Derek called him over. Emily chuckled, rubbing behind his ears. "You're my little shadow," she whispered. Rusty licked her hand and whined softly, eyes flickering between her and Derek. Later that evening, they had a quiet dinner by the fire. Emily leaned into Derek's shoulder. The flames flickered, and for a brief moment, the warmth felt real. Maybe this was Derek's way of saying sorry for the distance, for the silence. Maybe this trip was his way of reconnecting. The next morning, Derek suggested they take a short walk before packing up. The trail led them to a rocky outcrop, a natural balcony that overlooked a sea of trees and mist-covered valleys. Emily paused to catch her breath, one hand on her back, the other on Derek's arm. "It's beautiful," she said, wind catching her hair. He nodded. "Perfect spot, huh?" He moved behind her, arms sliding around her waist. She smiled, thinking he was being romantic. Rusty stood several feet away, tense, watching. Emily turned her head to look at Derek, just in time to see his expression change. The warmth vanished. His eyes, now cold and calculating, met hers. "Derek," she whispered. Before she could step back, she felt the sudden force of his hands, firm, decisive, shove her forward. The last thing she heard, before the wind swallowed her scream, was Rusty's bark. Time slowed as Emily's body broke through the silence of the morning. Her arms flailed, reaching for something, anything that wasn't there. The forest below yawned open beneath her, a blur of green and grey. Her scream, sharp and primal, disappeared into the wind. For a moment, all she could hear was her heart pounding and Rusty's distant, frantic barking, then dash impact. Emily, single quotes, aside, slammed against a rocky ledge halfway down the cliff. Her body ricocheted, bouncing once before crumpling onto a narrow shelf just wide enough to stop her descent. Pain exploded through her back and shoulders. A sharp edge tore at her thigh. Her baby jolted hard, and she instinctively curled around it, gasping, trying to breathe through the shock. She was alive. Barely blood trickled down her forehead. Her arms trembled as she tried to lift herself. The sky above was impossibly far away. She opened her mouth, tried to call for help. Derek, but no one answered. Above, Rusty barked madly. The little dog sprinted back and forth along the edge, his claws scratching into the earth, his ears perked and alert. He whined, circled, then barked again louder, more desperate. But Derek didn't come. Derek didn't even look down. He turned and walked calmly back through the trees, brushing dust from his hands as if it had been an accident. His face was unreadable, cold, calculated. Back at the car, parked on a dirt road just out of sight, Lana leaned against the hood, her arms folded. When she saw Derek appear alone, she raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's done," Derek said flatly. Lana's lips curved into a tight smile. She looked past him, toward the trail, and no one saw. No one. He popped the trunk and began packing their things. The cooler, the food, the camping gear, all of it went in quickly, methodically. Lana helped, her eyes never quite meeting his. The air around them seemed heavier now, like the mountain itself knew what they'd done. As they closed the trunk, Rusty's bark echoed through the trees again. Lana flinched. "That dog," she muttered. "You didn't get rid of it." Derek shrugged. "It'll run off eventually." They got into the SUV. Derek started the engine. Behind them, high above the canyon, Rusty barked again and again. Emily, clinging to consciousness on the ledge, curled tighter around her stomach. Her lips moved. "Please, someone, help." But all she heard was the crunch of tires over gravel, and the echo of a loyalty that refused to leave her behind. The SUV's engine roared away, its sound growing fainter as it disappeared down the gravel path. Silence returned to the cliffside except for the panicked barking of a little dog who refused to leave. Rusty stood at the edge of the drop, pacing, his ears pinned back, his eyes scanning the ledge below where Emily had fallen. She wasn't moving much, just a blur of red and trembling limbs far below. But she was alive. Rusty could sense it. He barked again, once, twice, sharp and desperate. Then he stopped and looked toward the campsite, his tail stiff, his body alert. Something had to be done. Emily was in danger, and he was the only one who hadn't abandoned her. Rusty took off toward the tent. The campsite was quiet. The fire pit was cold, the blankets still rumpled from where Emily had been sitting the night before. Rusty darted around the tent, sniffing, then pushing his nose into the half-zipped flap. He pawed at the bags inside until one fell open, a tangle of clothes, snacks, and gear. Then he saw it. A length of orange climbing rope coiled loosely inside. Rusty grabbed it in his teeth and pulled. It caught on the tent pole. He growled softly and yanked again. The rope dragged across the dirt, inch by inch, as the little dog strained with everything he had. Back at the cliff, Emily was losing strength. Her hands trembled as she tried to hold her weight. Her lips were cracked. Her body throbbed with bruises. The baby inside her kicked feebly, a reminder of the life she was fighting to protect. "Rusty," she whispered. The dog reappeared moments later, dragging the end of the rope across the ground. His chest heaved with effort. He reached the cliff's edge and dropped the rope with a bark, then looked down. Emily squinted. At first, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. But then the orange caught the sunlight. Her heart surged. She reached up weakly. The rope didn't reach yet. Rusty barked again, then took the rope in his mouth and backed up, pulling it inch by inch until enough of it slid over the edge. The end dangled, swaying a few feet above Emily's outstretched fingers. She braced herself, then pushed upward, her back screaming in protest. Her fingers scraped against the cliff wall. Then she caught the rope. "Good boy," she gasped, tears welling in her eyes. Rusty barked encouragingly from above. Emily took a deep breath. With one hand, she wrapped the rope around her wrist. With the other, she clawed at the cliff wall. Legs shook with effort. The rope burned against her palms, but she held on. Rusty didn't leave the edge. He paced and barked, glancing down often, as if checking on her progress. Every few seconds, he would let out a low whine, his whole body. Tensed. Emily slipped once. A gasp escaped her. Her arm jolted as she caught herself. Dirt crumbled beneath her feet, but she kept going. Every pull took everything she had. The pain was unbearable. Her vision swam, but she focused on Rusty's voice, his barking, his whines, his loyalty. After what felt like an eternity, her hand found the lip of the cliff. She dug her fingers into the dirt. Her other hand followed. Then, with a final scream of effort, she dragged her body over the edge and collapsed into the earth. Rusty was on her in an instant. He licked her face, wind, and pawed at her shoulder. Emily sobbed. She held on to him, burying her face in his fur. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved me." They lay there together, the woman and the dog, both shaking, both covered in dust and blood and sweat. The morning sun rose higher above the trees, casting golden light on a moment no one else would ever believe. Rusty curled around her protectively. Emily closed her eyes. She was safe, for now, but the next challenge was already coming. Emily lay in the dirt, her arms wrapped around Rusty, every inch of her body aching. Her back throbbed. Her legs were useless. Her palms were raw and blistered from the climb. But she had made it back. The tent stood a few feet away, its fabric fluttering gently in the mountain breeze. It looked so ordinary, so safe, like a memory from another life. She had to get there. Inside, there was warmth, water, maybe something to help her stay alive. She pushed herself up on one elbow. Her vision blurred, the world spun. But she moved, crawling. Rusty stayed beside her, nudging her gently with his nose, licking the sweat and blood from her face. She whispered to him between gasps, "Good boy, stay close." Every inch was a battle. The pain in her abdomen had changed deeper now. Rhythmic waves of pressure rolled through her lower belly. She knew the signs. The baby was coming. Not now, not here. She reached the tent and used what was left of her strength to pull herself inside. The sleeping bag lay crumpled in the corner. A bottle of water, a pack of wipes, a flashlight, useless and essential, all at once. She collapsed onto the sleeping bag, letting her head fall back. The canvas ceiling above her pulsed with shadow, and light as the wind moved outside. Her hands cradled her belly. She whispered through gritted teeth, "Just a little longer, baby. Just hold on." But the contractions didn't wait. They came fast, hard, unrelenting. Emily screamed into the empty air, her hands clawing at the ground. Rusty barked once, then laid beside her, licking her shoulder, whimpering as if he could absorb her pain. His body pressed against her side, like a warm shield. She remembered breathing techniques, vaguely, from the classes Derek never attended. Inhale through the nose, out through the mouth. Focus, but the pain tore through her focus like lightning. She writhed, sweat soaking her hair, her skin pale. She reached for the water bottle. Rusty pushed it closer with his nose. She drank greedily, gasping for air between swallows. The pressure built, a different pain now, a need to push. Terror surged through her. She was going to deliver this baby. Alone, she gritted her teeth, rolled to her side, and screamed as the next contraction hit. Rusty licked her hand. Didn't leave. The hours passed in agony. Each push stole what was left of her strength. The tent walls blurred. Her ears rang dot. Then dash, finally dash a change. The last push, a cry, high, thin, new. Emily sobbed with everything she had. Her arms fumbled to gather the slippery, screaming bundle to her chest. A boy, tiny, pink, alive. She wrapped him in Derek's old flannel shirt from the gear pile, pressed him to her heart. Let him hear it beat. Rusty barked softly, then rested his head beside them, watching. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "You're here, you're safe, we made it." She didn't know how long she held him, minutes, hours. The adrenaline faded, the pain returned, the bleeding hadn't stopped. Her limbs were weak, but the baby, he breathed. He moved. She looked at Rusty. "We did it," she said. Voice barely a whisper. The little corgi blinked slowly, then nudged the baby with his nose. Outside, the light shifted. Morning was coming. But for Emily, something even greater had arrived. The first light of morning crept slowly through the seams of the tent. Pale and silvery, it settled over Emily's face, highlighting the sharp angles of her exhaustion. Her lips were cracked, her skin cold and damp. Her arms still cradled the newborn boy against her chest, both wrapped tightly in a shirt that now bore the marks of blood and birth. Emily's eyes fluttered open. Every inch of her body ached. The cramps were worse now, and she could feel the blood pooling beneath her. Her strength was almost gone, but she didn't panic. There was only peace, and an overwhelming fatigue. She looked down. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell against her ribs, alive. That was all that mattered. She reached out and brushed her fingers against Rusty's ear. The corgi had been keeping vigil all night, eyes barely closed, body curled beside hers. He stirred instantly at her touch, blinking at her with alertness that had not faded. She tried to speak, but her voice came out a whisper. "Rusty, we need help." He stared at her for a moment, then stood. Something had changed. A sense of urgency passed through his little frame like a jolt. He sniffed the air. The sun was up. The forest was quiet. Then, without hesitation, Rusty darted from the tent. He sprinted through the underbrush, paws pounding the dirt path, his bark echoing through the trees. Short, sharp, insistent. The kind of bark that demanded attention. He stopped every few dozen yards and barked again, turning his head, listening. Then he ran again, further down the trail, a mile away, to hikers. An older man and his daughter were setting up a small camera tripod by a ridge. The man looked up. "Did you hear that?" The girl paused, listening. A dog. The barking grew louder. Then suddenly, from around a bend in the trail, a blur of fur and frantic energy came charging toward them. Rusty. He barked non-stop, circling them, then darting back down the trail. "I think he wants us to follow him," the girl said. They exchanged a look, then grabbed their things and followed. Rusty led them through winding paths, dodging rocks, leaping over fallen branches. The hikers struggled to keep up, but he never stopped. Barking never slowed down. 10 minutes later, they crested a ridge and saw the small, weather-worn tent tucked into a grove below. They rushed down. "Hello?" The man called no response. They reached the tent and pulled back the flap inside. Emily lay pale and still, her eyes barely open. "My God," the woman whispered. "Call 911, now." The man was already dialing. Rusty stood beside Emily and barked. Once, as if to announce them. The woman dropped to her knees beside the sleeping bag. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Emily blinked slowly. "The baby, he's okay." The woman looked down at the newborn, still breathing, flushed with life. "He's beautiful," she said gently. "You're safe now. We've got you." Within 30 minutes, the whir of helicopter blades stirred the trees. EMTs descended on ropes, gear clattering, voices calm and controlled. Rusty stepped aside but never strayed far. Emily and her son were stabilized, lifted on stretchers into the air. Rusty barked in protest when they tried to leave him behind, so one of the EMTs scooped him up and strapped him in two. The rescue team didn't question it in the news stories that followed. They would say it was the dog who saved her, that without Rusty's barking, his determination, his impossible sense of direction, Mellowy would not have survived, nor her child. The baby was declared healthy. Emily needed 2 surgeries and 3 blood transfusions, but she lived in the hospital. When she finally held her son in her arms with clarity and strength, she named him Chance, because that's what they had been given, a second chance, at life, at love, at beginning again. Rusty was allowed to stay in her room. Nurses brought him treats. He was in every news photo, curled at her feet, watching every camera. The world fell in love with him, but Emily, she didn't care about the headlines. She only cared that when everyone else turned away, Rusty didn't. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of the heart monitor and the soft whimper of a newborn nestled in his mother's arms. Emily sat upright now, her strength slowly returning, her body still sore but no longer broken. In her arms, the baby stirred, stretching tiny fingers and letting out a soft sigh. His name was Chance. She chose it the day after the surgery, when the doctors told her she'd lost nearly half her blood volume and had been within minutes of not making it. But she did. So did the baby. And it wasn't just luck. It was Rusty, her gaze drifted to the end of the hospital bed, where the little corgi was curled up, snoring softly. His ears twitched every time someone opened the door. He hadn't left her side once. Nurses and doctors had offered to take him for walks, to let him stretch his legs. He refused. Word of the rescue had spread quickly. The local paper ran a story, titled, "Corgi Saves Pregnant Woman and Newborn After Cliff Fall." News outlets across the country picked it up. Photos of Emily, her baby, and Rusty appeared on morning shows and online headlines. People sent letters, gifts, dog treats. A charity even offered to fund Rusty's veterinary care for life. Emily appreciated it. She really did. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the mountain, to Derek, to Lana. They had left her to die, and they had no idea she had survived. For now, she hadn't told the full story to the press. Not yet. She didn't want her son's first week of life to be defined by betrayal. She wanted peace, healing, but justice. That would come. She sat quietly for a long while, stroking Chance's tiny back. He was warm against her chest, safe. His heartbeat matched hers, steady and strong. Rusty lifted his head and looked at her. "We're going to be okay," she said softly. "You made sure of that?" The dog blinked once, then rested his chin back on his paws. A nurse peeked in. "Emily, there's a reporter here asking for you. Says he's doing a feature on hero animals." Emily nodded. "Tell him I'll talk tomorrow." She looked down at Chance. "You were born into chaos," she whispered. "But you were born, that's what matters." She knew that people would want the rest of the story soon. About how Derek had pretended to love her. About the secret affair. About the push. About how she had trusted him enough to turn her back at the edge of a cliff. That story would be told. And when it was, she would not be alone. She had Chance. She had Rusty. And she had truth on her side. Emily looked toward the window. The sun was setting, casting golden rays across the floor. It reminded her of that morning on the mountain before everything shattered. But tonight, it didn't feel like an end. It felt like a beginning. "But justice," she whispered, as if to herself, "justice is still out there." To be continued.